So today we have Frank Green, and he's going to talk about Ship Point. When I started learning about the Civil War in York County, I knew so little about it. I was amazed how little I was ever told. Because I was a teacher, and I've been interested in history for a long time, and we talk about York County history all the time, but very little about what happened in the Civil War. So I was not aware how much of it was happening right in our area, and that in 1862, when General McClellan brought over 120,000 troops up from Fort Monroe to Yorktown, they never left. And Yorktown was actually occupied throughout the whole Civil War for the rest of the time by Union forces. So Ship Point would have been enormously important because the water routes were so important. And so when you think of Chisholm Creek and the Cosin River, you see the importance of Ship Point. We don't call it Ship Point anymore, we call it Dare. And I was not aware that people's backyards were so important in the Civil War. And that's why we have Frank Green. Frank is an expert on this particular topic, especially on Dare, because he's lived there his whole life, and I'm sure he'll tell you about all of his relatives who come from Dare. But he's also a genealogist, and he can tell you best about that area and what happened in 1862. Frank Green.
Are you turning on? I gotta get used to this thing. Oh, thanks for coming to see us, and got a nice place to sit to get out of the sun. I want to thank Lois Winter and my friends at the York County Historical Committee for giving me the opportunity to share the story of Ship Point during the Civil War with you. With anybody out there, I know a few of y'all are. Anybody from Dare? All right. And I know at least one Ship Pointer over there. Kevin, got anybody else from Ship Point? Wow. All right, I guess I'd better get this thing right. One of the most fascinating things about researching local history is finding out about local events that occurred in your own home community. By growing up in Dare, I was familiar with such Civil War-related sites as the 5 unidentified grave markers of Providence Church that are marked with the Southern Cross and the earthworks at Ship Point. There are also many stories that have been passed on from one generation to another. One day, many years ago, I was going through some Hampton Monitor articles from May 1907 when I noticed one about a memorial celebration at Providence Church to honor the soldiers that were buried in the churchyard. The article said that these were from the Louisiana Tigers and were camped at Ship Point. I remember seeing a book in one of our local libraries about Louisiana troops in the Army of Northern Virginia called Lee's Tigers. One little bit of trivia, Louisiana State University Tigers is not named after the animal, it's named after the Civil War unit from that state, Louisiana Tigers. I found a book, looked at index for any mention of Ship Point. Ship Point was indeed mentioned. In fact, the passage that I read had a good account of Ship Point during Confederate occupation. The passage was footnoted, and these indicated that the Ship Point information was from letters written home to family and friends by Lieutenant Robert Miller of 14th Louisiana Infantry. I found the full letters in an old copy of the Virginia History and Biography magazine. And this whole thing is sort of like deduction, one thing going to another, going to another, going to another. The letters gave a detailed look at life at Ship Point during the Civil War. This began many years of doing off and on research on Ship Point's role in the Civil War. The time came to stop researching and start writing. And this is what I found out about Ship Point and Dare during the Civil War. Ship Point's a part of Dare, and Dare used to be called Fish Neck. In the spring of 1862, Union General George B. McClellan put together a plan to end the war early by marching up the peninsula and taking Richmond. General John Bankhead Magruder and the Army of the Peninsula was charged with attempting to stop McClellan. Magruder's plan was to have 3 lines of defense stretched across the peninsula. The first line went from Ship Point to Youngsville in Warwick County and was anchored in the center by earthworks in the Howard's Mill area. This line was not meant to completely stop the Union soldiers, but to stall them long enough for further fortifications to be built and reinforcements to arrive. The second line went from Yorktown to Mulberry Island. It's called the Warwick Line. The third consisted of a series of redoubts in the Williamsburg area. Why was Ship Point important to the Confederates? The main reason was because of its location. It's located on the eastern end of the Fishneck Peninsula in Chesapeake Bay. The Pocosin River and Cheeseman's Creek meet at Ship Point. Ship Point also had a landing where supplies could be brought in by water. The Confederates were also worried about the Union Army going around the first defensive line and attacking from the rear or flank. The name Ship Point is found in land records in York County as far back as the middle 1700s. It was originally part of the Cheeseman land grant in the middle 1600s. In the early 1800s, Ship Point was purchased by Thomas Hutchins of Matthews County. The Hutchins were one of three Matthews families that would play a prominent part in Dare history. The others were the Davis and Smith families. We also had the Weston and Foster families, so in the 1840s, Dare was pretty much a suburb of Matthews County. In 1861, Mr. Hutchins had a farm and also did a business at the landing. During the late summer of 1861, Confederate units began settling at Ship Point. For this presentation, I'm going to tell about three of these units: the 32nd Virginia Infantry, the 1st North Carolina Infantry, and the 14th Louisiana Infantry. Probably the first military personnel were units of the 32nd Virginia Infantry, and this was the local peninsula units with troops from York County, James City County, Williamsburg, Hampton, Elizabeth City County, and Warwick County. At the time they first reported to Ship Point, the unit was still known as the 115th Virginia Militia. They would enter Confederate Army service while at Ship Point and become the 32nd Virginia Infantry. Most of the men from the 32nd Virginia were from the Lee's Guards and the Washington Artillery in Hampton. By the time the Washington Artillery arrived at Ship Point, they only had 3 guns. And the guns had no carriage, and they had to make their own gun carriages. It's also interesting to note that at this time, the Washington Artillery was in blue uniforms. The Washington Artillery was later transferred to the 1st Peninsula Artillery. In August 1861, another Confederate unit arrived at Ship Point. This was the 1st North Carolina Infantry. They were also known as the Bethel Regiment because they had participated in the Battle of Big Bethel, which is generally considered to be the first battle of the Civil War. The regiment had been camped in Yorktown, and they found the living conditions to be terrible. Disease and other maladies were rampant, and the regiment needed another home. North Carolinian General D.H. Hill went to Richmond in order to maintain permission to move the unit. Finally, he received permission to move to 1st North Carolina to Ship Point. They were of the understanding that it would be a healthier location than Yorktown. They were soon disappointed. One soldier called the area the sickliest place on earth, and Lyle can identify with this. The water was awful. And even today, much of Dare's well water is not too good. And as cooler weather approached, the Carolinians found Ship Point much more to their liking. The fresh fish that they were able to pull from the river did much to supplement their diets. The 14th Louisiana Infantry arrived at Ship Point after a long and perilous journey from that state. The regiment was commanded by Colonel Valery Sulikowski. Sulikowski was a Polish immigrant and then served in the Austrian army. After arriving in Louisiana, he was made engineer for the city of New Orleans. The 14th Louisiana was hastily put together and was not enough time to instill military bearing in raw troops. This probably forced Colonel Sulikowski to rule with an iron hand. During the trip from Louisiana, Virginia, he actually had to shoot some of the soldiers that attacked him and other soldiers. Upon arrival at Ship Points, the Louisiana troops shared the Carolina troops' low opinion. Lieutenant Miller wrote that it was probably the muddiest, most miserable place. Sulakowski began to take control of conditions at Ship Point. He was probably the ranking officer there. He created a small village of wood huts, and Lieutenant Miller wrote that it had all the convenience of civilized life. He said there was even an opera house. Okay. Miller describes the opera house as being built simplest of architecture, of pine logs, a shingle roof with no ceiling. It was long enough to accommodate all who wished to go and would suffice to amuse us very well. The regimental band helped compose the troupe of performers. Being that Sulakowski was an engineer, he probably supervised the construction of the earthworks at Ship Point. Many of these still exist today. As conditions improved, some of the soldiers began to have a better opinion of Ship Point. Lieutenant Miller actually grew to have a fondness for the area. He enjoyed the sea and wrote that he was set for hours in the front battery gazing at it. And that, the gun positions, those batteries, some of them are still there up next to the water, and it's in the private property in this guy's side yard. The men, all afflicted with spring fever, brought by genial rays of the sun today, were lounging about lazily on the parade ground in fatigue uniform. The soft sea breeze and unmilitary appearance of things, except for sentry walks in front of my door, the altogether rural look of things made it the loveliest scene that I've beheld in a long time. In a later letter, he said after the war he would like to return and live at Ship Point. Lieutenant Robert Miller was never to return to Ship Point. In one of the ironies of war, he was killed at the Second Battle of Manassas. The North Carolina troops, like all the Confederate troops, had suffered from boredom. This, combined with news at home of victories with General Burnside in the eastern part of the state and the Outer Banks, made life even more miserable for them. They had requested or denied permission to return to North Carolina and fight. They were tired of sitting and waiting. One night, a group of them commandeered some boats and went to destroy a lighthouse on the tip of the peninsula, about 6 miles from Fort Monroe. Lewis Warlick volunteered for Brigade and gave the following account of the expedition. We started 3 hours before sundown. There was 23 of us in all, in small boats, and were gone the entire night and did not return until daylight. I was traveling all the time and had no way of lying down to rest. They exposed the whole time to night air. After all our trouble and danger to which we were exposed, we only succeeded in part. We arrested the lighthouse keeper and brought him to Ship Point. The lighthouse we could not burn or blow up, as it was solid masonry 40 foot high from the base. Therefore, we had to leave that fine piece of property to benefit only the Yankees. I have no record of what happened to the lighthouse keeper. On March 21st, 1862, General Magruder gave the order for the troops at the Youngsville, Harwood Mills, Ship Point line to fall back to the Warwick line. This would essentially leave Ship Point behind Union lines. Lieutenant Miller stated this regiment was driven away and was given order to fall back to the line that went to Yorktown, from Yorktown to the James River. This was the second of General Magruder's 3 lines of defense across the peninsula. It seemed that the evacuation of Ship Point had taken place in great haste. In his book on the 32nd Virginia Infantry, Les Jensen wrote that the Lee Guards barely got out of Ship Point without being captured. In fact, a man named Enoch Cox, Samuel Lively, and one man named Bircher were among several men left behind and believed captured. Thomas Hutchins' farm was free of soldiers, but not for long. April 4th, 1862, Colonel William Averill and his 3rd Pennsylvania Cavalry went to reconnoiter Ship Point and their garrison and defenses. When he returned, that evening and reported the place was abandoned and there was enough barracks already there for 3,000 soldiers. General McClellan himself had a particular interest in Ship Point. It was apparent from reading his reports that he was going to probably try to take Ship Point had it not been abandoned. So there was an extreme possibility we might have read history books of the battleship Point. In his April 5th report, he mentioned that Ship Point had been turned and was in control of his cavalry. He ordered General Oliver Otis Howard's brigade to Ship Point. The first Union soldiers were the 5th New Hampshire, who came at 10 o'clock in the morning on April 6th. Other regiments in Howard's brigade were the 64st New York Infantry, 64th New York Infantry, I think it said 61st, and the 82nd Pennsylvania Infantry. Ship Point was to serve the Union Army in 3 ways. It was to be a supply depot, a point of debarkation, and a hospital. It was to figure highly in General McClellan's plan to seize Yorktown. The troops would go by ship from Alexandria to Fort Monroe and then to Ship Point, where they would be marched to the lines in Yorktown. One of the first things that they did was to establish a supply depot. This was done by order of General McClellan through Quartermaster General Stuart Van Fleet. There was another supply depot on Cheeseman's Creek about a mile from Ship Point, and a smaller one on Back Creek. The depot at Ship Point was used almost exclusively for subsistent provisions such as food. The order was carried out by General Howard, and he made a personal reconnaissance of the coast and river and found Ship Point the most practical place to receive supplies by water. A major problem for Van Fleet was the conditions of the roads in the peninsula in 1862. The winter and spring of 1862 was very wet, and the primitive road system became extremely muddy and almost impassable. The first Union troops at Ship Point were put to work building corduroy roads from there to Yorktown. This was done by cutting down trees and putting them across the roads and filling the spaces with dirt. It was estimated the Union Army built 20 miles of corduroy road in York County during the Civil War. The Union occupation of Ship Point was a time of extreme hardship. Oh, Gus. The Union occupation of Ship Point was a time of extreme hardship for the Hutchins family. The family was forced to give up their own food and provisions for the troops. Thomas Hutchins was taken prisoner by the Union soldiers in hopes he would give information on the Confederate troops. Mr. Hutchins' wife Lucinda was sick the whole time during the Union occupation. General Howard ordered that the old lady not be disturbed. The Union Army put together a series of telegraph stations across the peninsula. One of them was in the attic of the Hutchins house at Ship Point. 12-year-old Theophilus Hutchins, who later on would become the treasurer of York County and Mrs. Lucy O'Hara's father, would throw bricks at the window, and sticks at the window of the telegraph office. When the telegrapher found out who was making a noise, he opened the window and yelled out, "Get away from here, you little rebel." There was another tragedy for the Hutchins family. One of the brothers, Humphrey Hutchins, was killed in a battle. General Howard made the Humphrey house his headquarters. Mr. Humphrey had married one of Mr. Hutchins' daughter. In his autobiography, Howard wrote that Mr. Humphrey was very happy that he chose his house as his headquarters. He stated that soldiers, camp followers, and wagoneers had come through constantly day or night, shooting his cows, killing his chickens, stealing his eggs, and stealing his entire winter supply of food. General Howard didn't think of this and had wondered what his mother would have thought if this happened to her. A few days later, General Israel Richardson's 1st Division of the 2nd Corps arrived at Ship Point. One of these units was General Meare's Irish Brigade. This was become well known. They were become well known later in the war for their courage and tenacity under fire. When they arrived at Ship Point, bad weather had prevented the ships from coming in close. Some of the soldiers came in small boats, while others waited ashore in chest-deep water. General Meare sent an officer ashore to inquire as to whose command was already assured if they could offer any assistance. He made contact with General Howard, who ordered his men to share their hut supplies and rations with the Irishmen. Howard's men did this willingly. They soon bivouacked and made a headquarters. Hut was set up. The only thing that distinguished it as a headquarters was a sentry walking up and down and their famous Irish green flag. The story of the Irish Brigade's time at Ship Point is given in David Power Cunningham's history of that brigade. He describes General Richardson as being a plain, rather slovenly in dress, generally wearing blue pants and an overcoat of a private, without any insignia of his rank. On one occasion, while walking through the camp, he met an Irishman staggering home. He said, "Who do you belong to?" he asked the soldier. I would have tried to do an Irish accent, but I can't. What do I belong to, is it? Ah, that's a good one, comrade. I belong to the Irish Brigade. And what body asked, do you belong to? Oh, I belong to General Richardson's command, not knowing he's talking to General Richardson. You do? I don't know the old fella, but they say he's a rum one. Dirty Dick, they call him. Indeed. How do you like him? Oh, very well. I hear the boys saying he is brave and is a brave old fellow, and all the boys like Dirty Dick well enough. But would you like to have a drink? And he says, I thought there was no whiskey in this camp. Isn't there indeed? Come along, old chap. And he took the general by the arm. It happened that a Miss Blank, they never gave her name, who accompanied the brigade in a confidential capacity as a supernumerary quartermaster or commissary assistant or something of the kind, always kept on hand a generous supply of bottled commissary that she retailed on the sly for $3 a bottle. Now, she was doing a decent business in one of the shanties when Paddy Duran came with his new friend. I say, miss, let me have a bottle of that firewater of yours. Sure enough, Paddy and she went to the back part of the shanty where she was putting in a little water to qualify the commissary for fear it might be too strong and hurt the boys. Now I want a bottle. I have a friend with me. Ms. Blank was in the act of handing the bottle to Patty when she seemed very much taken with the appearance of her friend, who she recognized as General Richardson. Paddy Duran, you villain, may curse light on you. You deceived me and aimed the bottle at Paddy's head, but he dodged it. In doing so, he knocked together his friend, upsetting him. Oh, General Richardson, dear, she came running to help raise him up. Don't mind that villain, and that's Blank. Whatever she was going to say remained unsaid. For Paddy Duran, hearing who his friend was, made a dart for the door. It so happened that Ms. Blank was between him and the door. So in all his fright, he knocked her down, completely rolling her over on the general. He did not wait to receive the result and made a beeline for camp. Whether General Richardson thought this affair too ludicrous to make any noise about it, or in fact he kind of enjoyed it, he never said anything, much to Paddy Duran's relief. The Civil War was General Israel Richardson's third war. He was respected by his men. He was killed September 17th at Sharpsburg, also known as Battle of Antietam. The Irish Brigade served heroically for the remainder of the war. They were nearly destroyed in the Battle of Fredericksburg when they made charge after charge against Confederate troops who were behind a stone wall at Mary's Heights. General Oliver Otis Howard lost an arm at one of the 7 days battles outside of Richmond. He later commanded troops at Chancellorsville and was on the receiving end of Stonewall Jackson's famous flanking maneuver in the battle. After the war, General Howard founded Howard University in Washington, D.C. On April 9, 1862, General McClellan himself came to Ship Point. He briefly visited General Howard's headquarters and had a longer visit with General Richardson. He came really to visit his brother, Dr. Robert McClellan, who was working in a hospital at Ship Point. The Ship Point Hospital has been described, actually there was two of them there. One was regimental, the other was like an evac hospital. The Ship Point Hospital was described as a large log building. It may have been the old Confederate Opera House that Lieutenant Miller described earlier. Local tradition, and some of you Ship Pointers might help me with this, near the intersection of Anchor Drive and Ship Point Road. The Ship Point Hospital was a Civil War version of an evac hospital. Patients were taken from the field to the hospital where they embarked on a ship to Alexandria. The trip to Ship Point must have been agony for the sick and wounded men as they traversed the newly built corduroy roads. If you can imagine being wounded on up and down, essentially logs spread over the road. Steamers were converted. War records show that many men died while at the Ship Point Hospital. Steamers were converted to hospital ships and were anchored at Cheeseman's Creek. They were outfitted and operated by the United States Sanitary Commission. This organization was founded in 1861 by Clara Barton, and it was a forerunner of the American Red Cross. The commission provided nurses, orderlies, and medical supplies and provisions to the Army. Two of the hospital ships anchored off Ship Point was the Daniel Webster I, Daniel Webster II, and they had previously been used as troop transports and were later outfitted as hospital ships. And I read one time that these things had to be completely cleaned, that they were nasty from transporting troops, and it took a while just to get them clean enough to transport patients up to Alexandria. There was a smaller ship named the Wilson Small that was used to transport patients from rivers and creeks to the larger ships that couldn't get through. On the May 4th, Yorktown fell and Ship Point was no longer needed as a supply depot or embarkation site. The hospital continued in operation until late May. Ship Point and York County were to remain behind Union lines for the remainder of the war. During the war, Fishneck residents had heard of many churches that had been desecrated and torn down. This was the fate of Zion Church at Seaford and also Bethel Church. The people approached General Erasmus Caius and requested that Providence Church be spared this fate. General Caius issued an order that the church not be molested in any way. During the 1990s, an archaeological survey was done at Ship Points, and the results showed very little artifacts in the area. Civil War relics have been found at Smith's Railway, the old Humphrey House, and at various fields, gardens, and houses in Dare. After the Civil War, Ship Point was to become peaceful again. The Hutchins family eventually sold the farm. The area is now heavily wooded, but there's still subdivisions popping up all through the area. Some of the gun emplacements are... That's all right. It's all right. No problem. Some of the gun emplacements are still visible and are in a private yard and are well taken care of. Much of the trench line is still intact and appears in good shape. The Humphrey House is still standing, and it's been remodeled several times, and I've been, and their current owner, Ross Jernigan, has let me visit it several times, and a few months ago, myself and Michael Moore, who is the curator of Lee Hall, and Enview went down there to visit. It's now it's now a stop on his tour. In August 1933 and September 2003, Ship Point was to be back in the news again. The reason was not war, but hurricanes. The August storm of 1933 caused a quick evacuation of Ship Point. Some had to flee quickly. Rising tide in the middle of the storm, the homes of Dr. Blackwell and Dr. Hodges were washed from their foundations, and they had to retrieve household articles from up in the trees. But that's another story for another time. Hurricane Isabel destroyed many homes at Ship Point. Hurricanes and nor'easters right now pose the biggest threat to the gun emplacements on the shoreline. And that pretty much ends my presentation. Do y'all have any questions?
If you have some questions, we have plenty of time for questions. If you have a question, we'd like you to use the microphone so we can record it. Any other questions?
I'll start. Hi, how are you?
I'm here.
I see as the map may not represent the area, or maybe it does.
That's Yorktown.
And yeah, I don't have one of my glasses. Yeah. Can you sort of direct me to exactly, if I were to take Deer Road and turn left at the store, where do I go to Ship Point?
Two ways to get down there. Turn left at the store, follow Railway Road till it becomes Link Road, go from Link Road to Ship Point Road, go down Ship Point Road to where it makes a Y with Anchor Drive, go up maybe about 10, 20 yards, and you'll see the trench line on your right. It looks like a big ditch. And but once you get up on it, you'll see it's a classic trench line that goes, yeah, you got it there, and it goes like this all the way to the water. It once went all the way across Ship Point, but probably Mr. Hutchins knocked that part of it down after the war.
So I wouldn't be intruding if I went to look.
It's on private property. You probably have to get permission.
Okay.
It was in the Cove's family, and I think they sold it to make a subdivision. And I had permission. She gave me permission to go down there years and years ago. All that's on private property now.
You can see a lot of the road. From Ship Point Road, you can see a good deal of it.
Okay. Okay, I've never done that. I'm gonna do
Yeah. There's a subdivision down at the end of it, and it's between the trench line and the gun emplacements. The gun emplacements are pretty much classic gun emplacements with front and sides and nothing on the back. 2 or 3 of them in real good condition, and there's the rest of them. There's maybe 4 or 5 you can see, and the rest of them are, kind of really eroded away. And in fact, if you were just down there, you might not know there were gun emplacements until, I went on one of Michael Moore's tours, and he showed how the gun emplacements for artillery, and that's gave me kind of an idea of what to look at. So, I was kind of lucky that I kind of knew the people down there, and going down there, just hang on.
Several questions. Where exactly, or where do people think the landing was? Because it's all very shallow out there now.
I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure. The house itself was, I think, at the end of Anchor Drive, the old Hutchins house. So I'll be honest with you, I don't know.
Okay. And one of the local residents down there told me there was a pontoon bridge across Hodges Cove at one point in time.
I don't know about Hodges Cove. There was one across Cheeseman's Creek from the railway over to what's then called Belvin's Point. Now it's the end of Cheadle Loop down in that area. And there was some union activity over there. I don't know if there was one across Hodges Cove, which was called Johnson's Creek at the time. It's Hodges Cove is after Dr. Hodges, who had a summer residence in the 20s, 30s, and 40s down at Ship Point. And he was from Richmond. And there was a Dr. Blackwell that also was from Richmond that had a summer cottage down there. It's down there where the Roosters live.
And I've got a copy of a map done by Magruder of that area. And there was a house that right at the end where Howard's Landing was, and that house was on the map.
In fact, Ron here's done a lot of research on that, on the Howard family. That house goes back to the 1600s. It was in the Howard family up until the early 1900s when General Montague bought it. And that's who I remember living in. It was General Montague. Just Slater Montague from, he was, lived in Hampton, but it was in there till
1930s.
Okay, 1930. And yeah, it would be on there. There was also, on old maps, there was one down at the end of Weston. There's some down at the end of Weston Road. Ship Point, there's one that's down at the end of Wynn Road. There were houses down there. The railway, the Tennis family had some houses down in the upper part of Dare, which is now where the Green family and the Crescent family owned.
This shows Ship Point going down and then doing a real hard 90-degree left onto a Jennings Road that goes all the way down to the end of the point.
That's it. Yeah, Jennings Road. It was named after Mr. Jennings.
Drive, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, Mr. Jennings was from up north, came down, and he was either treasurer or commissioner of the revenue for a while in York County. And yeah, that's down there. In fact, the gun emplacements are just to the right of where Ship Point Road ends and Jennings Drive begins.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Because Kevin, you grew up on Jennings Drive.
More questions?
What about the Humphrey house?
Mm-hmm.
Where?
Go down Hodges Cove Road to Jernigan Lane. It's down at the end of Jernigan Lane. The Humphreys, I don't know much of them other than they were probably from Norfolk. They tie in with the Hutchins family. And one neat story about them was in the 1880s, one of them went out to Nevada and did silver mining. And he actually has a thing in the York County records, a deed or something that he has to do with something in Nevada. And there's actually a small one-stone cemetery down there in Mr. Harlow's backyard. It's a Humphrey family cemetery. There's also some Humphreys that are buried at Grafton Christian Church. And they tie in with the Hutchins family, but they're originally from Norfolk, I think. How they tie in with the Hodgeses, I'm not sure what they do. Anybody else?
I think.
You say it's on Jernigan Lane there?
Yeah, the end of Jernigan Lane.
Right, okay.
You got the cul-de-sac, and you got the little dirt lane that goes to the house. It's down there on, well, it's on a point, 3 sides of water.
Yep, I see it right there.
Yep, and it's, well, Ross lives down there. His mother bought it, I think, and father bought it sometime in the 50s. And they're pretty good friends of mine. And yeah, I pretty much got that. If I used to hunt down there with a metal detector, and they would just knock on the door and let us know they're there. And I always got along good with them.
The Cove that used to live down at the end of Hodges.
Yep.
Cove, Eric Sheriff.
Yep.
Still
I know Mr. Sheriff.
died, but his son is living there.
Johnny Hall, yeah.
Johnny Hall, but Stephen Sheriff.
I knew Mr. Sheriff. And Coles Hall lived down there.
You sat up there at Eric's place and looked across that for people from the church every Tuesday morning.
Yeah, Coles Hall had a neat place. I always liked
Yes.
going down there.
Had many church picnics at their house.
Did you ever find anything?
No. Back when my dad was young, Boy Scouts used to camp back there. There was nothing to find mini balls and stuff like that down. There was a place we called Sandy Beach, and they would party down there back in the 70s when we were coming along, the 60s, and it was nothing to find a lot of mini balls down there. When we were playing hide and seek when we were kids over across Mr. Kalana's, which is where Rosa grew up. Back here, we found a mini ball. We didn't know what it was, so we went and asked Mr. Kalana, what's this thing? He said, it's a mini ball. And we found artifacts in our back field And I found some over at Mr. Kalina's, and that's, we live probably about half a mile from Ship Point, so, you know, it tells the, you know, the fact there were troops that far down, and there's probably all up in the upper part of Dare, up, well, probably as far as where Delma lives, all up through there. And it was, back then, it wasn't as treed over as it was then. It was mostly farmland. In fact, my grandmother said she could stand at the end of our lane and see the corner store. So it was farmland. They had a swamp in the middle, which is now Lakes of Dare.
I was just going to say, when you're talking about artifacts and stuff with my neighbor, I live on Anchor Lane.
Okay.
And my neighbor found.
I hope I was halfway right when I said.
Well, yeah, sure. But he found a percussion pistol raking for horse business right
Oh,
in
yeah.
his front yard.
Yeah, a lot of these watermen dig up stuff all the time. Because there's really a lot down there, and there's probably the seafloor, Cheeseman's Creek, Coast River is probably littered with stuff. I've never known anybody to bring it up, but I've heard the stories. Well, yeah.
In Hodges Cove, I did find, I don't know how old a bottle, a blue bottle, old bottle, it said Davis baking powder.
Okay.
So would that be that period?
Do we have one of those downstairs?
We have a Baker is the one, the bottle that we have down there, I think is Baker. Mom says she remembers Davis.
Oh, yeah, they make a lot of baking powder.
We found, I found a bunch of old bottles there at, down on Mr. Kalina's Cove. Where I grew up, you had our farm, you had a cove. You had Mr. Kalina's farm, you had a cove. Then you had General Montague's farm.
Is that going up Cheeseman's Creek or the other way?
Other way, down on the Hudson River.
Creek and all that way?
Yeah. Where I grew up was at the corner of the Coastal River and Patrick's Creek, in a little cove.
Yeah.
And that cove, for a while, it was called Wainwright's Cove after my great-grandfather. Before that, it was called Nanny's Creek. And some people still call it that. In a lot of the records, it's called that. Hodges Cove was called Johnson's Creek. And the only thing I could think of, it might have been a Union somebody, because I can't think of any Johnsons that were historically in Dare. There was a Johnson family who lived at the end of Dare Road, but that's more recently. So I don't know how they got that name. But Ship Point, that, and Fish Neck was really the name of the Howard plantation, and that shows up as far back as the mid-1700s in deeds and stuff like that. In fact, Dare is even mentioned in one Revolutionary War record when it mentions sending some troops down to protect Fish Neck. And so it goes back at least that far as a place of military importance. And,
Changed in 1905 today.
yeah.
One had a fish neck, one had a crab neck, and some other kind of neck made in Danny, Seaport, and Dare.
Yeah, Lower York County is formed of little peninsulas that are known as necks. You had Goodwin's Neck.
Yep. Okay, that's.
Yeah, you had Crab Neck, which is Seaford, Fish Neck. There's a little teeny one called Whirly's Neck, which goes off of Showalter Road, which is near where the Lindsay family and the original Wainwright family lived. Then you had Calthrop's Neck, and then you had Hunt's Neck, and they were like little fingers that stuck out to the bay, and they were peninsulas. And right now, Hunt's Neck's in the city of Pocosin, and they've done research. They found stuff down there too. But yes, ma'am.
Real little down at Ship Point, we used to go down there and swim. And my family would take a lot of money for going to boat and take money and go down, but there's a lot of water, a lot of ground over there. But we wonderful to go down there in the summertime and have parties several times down there.
A lot of people party down there.
Still do.
I live on Jennings Drive.
Excuse me.
And we purchased that home. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can't do that.
In 73. And there was still trenches in the middle of Jennings Drive then. And people that had that land covered some of those trenches because they didn't with plowing.
Still talking about trench on the other side.
I've not heard that.
And I think if it, and I could be correct on, okay.
I know they had that one big
That
trench
the
line.
Coles and the Jennings originally bought that property and then it was split. And Pam Cole.
Yeah, I know Pam.
Owned, all of that ship point.
Yeah,
At one time, I think it was 26 acres.
yeah. Pam's the one that gave me permission to go down there.
Okay, Pam's family was very interested in history and preserving,
Yeah, I knew Dr.
the
Coles.
trenches and that. And Pam at one point gave me the history from that her father, had written up. Are you aware that that history is, that there was a history written?
I haven't spoke to her in several years. She's living, I think, up in New Hampshire or Connecticut.
But she lives in Grafton.
Does?
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a copy of that. I gave it to
I'd
my
love to see
son.
it. Dr. Coles had a real nice place down there. He had that big field there. We were kids. We used to all play football on that field. And right now I want to relic on that field. But yeah, she was real nice to me. I've contacted her about, when I went back there. And, she says, going back there all you want. Don't mess with anything. Okay, sure. So,
Well, I'll try to retrieve that history that she gave me.
okay.
And see if it's information pertaining just basically to ship one.
This is stuff that I found, biggest thing that I used was Google book search. I put in Ship Point, Civil War, and kept getting hit after hit after hit. A lot of it was memoirs and letters from Union soldiers, and the Union Army, to a person, despised Ship Point. They hated it. And there's a very good point about the water, because there's places still in day. There's got all city water now. Back when they had well water, ours was pretty good, but there were some other places it was barely drinkable.
Got a TV?
Probably. And anybody else?
Frank, is the Howard house somewhere around here? Is that the oldest house in there?
It's the oldest one in there. It's got to be.
Howard family got it in the early 1600s.
Yeah.
600 acres. What the news?
Yeah, we still got some old, well, the railway house, the Smiths, goes back to the 1840s. Well, the Humphreys, where Ross lives. I'm trying to think of some others down there. The one at the end of Jethro Lane, I think that's, if it's still the original one, is probably a Civil War era that Arthur B. White lived in.
That's not that.
Arthur B. White lived in Dare, and he was killed at the Battle of Sharpsburg. 32nd Virginia took almost 50% casualties in that battle. And so that's where the majority of a York County person was killed or wounded in the Civil War. It was probably in that battle. Tim Smith will go more into that in next month's presentation. But, yeah.
Right, once somebody asked about the landing, from the 50s, if you go to Ships Point now, based on what it was in the 50s, a lot of the shoreline is gone. There were trees on the shore that are gone. All of sand, we talked about the beach down there, almost all of that's gone, and the river, the water's actually cut through that. So the way that it would have looked back in the 1600s, I mean, even now compared to what it was like in the 50s, a lot of it is gone. So it's possible we could have gotten ships much closer to shore back then, because much of the shoreline's gone. And where the cannon emplacements were on the private property there, there used to be marsh all in front of that protecting it, and almost all that marsh is gone just from the pollution, and the marsh grass is almost all died out there. So if we get a good storm and the waves coming right in there, those cannons, where the cannons were, the emplacements there.
Yeah, they're right up almost to the waterline now, because that doctor let me walk out there on and photograph it, and I was thinking next big hurricane, they're gone. Kevin grew up on Jennings Drive right there, right on Ship Point. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because, yeah, the tide Where I grew up, it used to be a point, and now it's just like a little island there at the middle of the Cove, because that point's almost completely washed away. And my dad had to put up a bulkhead in order to protect theirs from washing away. But that's another story. You make anything?
We have time for 1 or 2 more questions.
Yes, we go to Zion Church, and so I was interested in about taking over the churches. I knew I'd read in the church history about the church being destroyed, but did they stay like a few weeks in the church and they took over the church and then burn it when they left?
Well, what happened, the Union Army, we were the enemy to them. No two ways of looking about it. And so they would take a church and they would use it as a hospital, they would use it as a stable, and then a lot of times they would disassemble it and bring it up to the building materials up here to Yorktown to use as hospitals and stuff like that. Bethel Church, the original Bethel Church near the battlefield, which was there until about 1916 when it was condemned when they built the reservoir. Then it moved up there to across from Taft High School, same church. And that church was an offshoot of Grafton Christian Church. They were the first, they're originally Baptist, they were first Baptist churches in the area. And and there's a couple of real good books on that particular subject in the Virginia Anne Arundel, New York County Library. I want to introduce probably the oldest Dare former resident, Rosa Westcott. You're what, 93? 99. My second cousin. Thank you for coming.
Any more questions?
I don't have a question, but I have a request.
Okay, go ahead.
Anybody that's here that has any of the places that Frank was talking about on your property, or have a neighbor that you might be able to tell, if they could either contact Frank or Dave and let them take some pictures, because I know Kevin's mentioned about, you know, they may not make it through another storm. It'd be great to have some pictures before, and if anybody has pictures back before some of these things were in better shape, the museum frequently participates with scanning, and if you have a number of pictures, we can set up something that will fit your schedule, either at Parks and Rec office or at the church or somewhere or another. I'm sure we can get a spot. If you just simply let us scan your picture right while you're standing there, we'll hand it right back to you. We won't keep it, we won't destroy it. It's a flatbed scanner, so it doesn't have to go in through anything, so you don't have to worry about it being eaten by the machine. We'd love to do that, because heaven forbid, but something happened to those pictures, that's it. You know, we're going to lose a lot of our history, so please.
The map that he was talking about, that had Ship's Point on, is that available in the library or here? Is that available anywhere online?
I know the map, you can probably find it online.
Online, there's a lot
of
things that show.
I'd like to see the one that had the house.
Yeah.
They got the official union, well, the Grace, they got, Lord, that was the official union, the official Civil War atlas.
Yeah.
And I'll bet you it's there.
Yeah, it's shows up on several. Another quick thing about Ship Point, glad you brought that up. Downstairs in our new exhibit, we have a drawing of the 61st New York Infantry bivouacking at Ship Point by Winslow Homer. And he was there at Ship Point. Walt Whitman was also a hospital steward at Ship Point. He was the famous poet. And Homer Winslow was a famous artist. He was known particularly for seascapes. And he did several drawings of Yorktown, all that. Robert Steaton and other artists. I don't think he did anything at Ship Point. Yes, ma'am.
Where's the Homer picture?
Where? It's the original is in the museum in someplace up. I can't remember the exact name, but they sent me a copy. It's downstairs in our new display, the Civil War.
I'll look for it.
And I had it, I was going to use it for something else. I thought it'd be a better use in the museum.
Okay.
And a couple other quick things. We just expanded this museum downstairs. I'd love for y'all to come see it when we're open. We're kind of proud of it. And the museum on Main. And York County Historical Society, we're in our 12th year. And we meet first Monday of the month at Providence Church in Fishneck. And yes, ma'am.
Well, I was just going to mention, you asked about information and taking pictures. We have a picture from Mrs. Ruse that was taken probably in the 20s or 30s that shows the Hutchins farm. When that was all farmland. Shows the roads as they are. Still really probably follow the old farm roads, but the Hutchins home was sitting probably at the cul-de-sac on Anchor Drive. That cul-de-sac. And
You said Miss Roos gave you that?
Mrs. Roos got that. Yeah, I just got a photostatic copy.
Mrs. Roos is the daughter of the Knackman family down the store, owned the store. And they lived down there. In fact, we kept their horses for a while. And that'd be pretty
Railway
neat.
Road.
Close to
Anchor Lane is where she was.
I knew somebody at the shipyard that worked with me when I was down there in the 70s that was sort of renting or living in a house there, and I think that Knackman family had or something like that. They were. It was on Anchor Drive.
That's Anchor Lane.
Yeah.
That's Anchor Lane.
Yeah, it's Anchor Lane. There's a little anchor, something that runs off of it.
That's where she lives.
Yeah, down there where Jack Jennings lived, down in that area.
Thank you very much, Frank.
I want to thank y'all for coming to see me.